All right, so today we are going to take a deep dive into Holacracy.
Okay.
You know that system that some people are saying is the future of work?
Right.
You sent over a really interesting mix of stuff.
Yeah.
We've got the official Holacracy white paper,
hmm
some academic papers, and even some real-world case studies of companies that have tried to implement this thing.
Yeah. So
It's fascinating stuff.
let's try to figure out
Yeah.
if this no boss thing is brilliant or completely bonkers
Right.
and what it could mean for how organizations
Right.
work going forward.
I think that what strikes me right away is how Holacracy really tries to address this tension between how companies are traditionally structured
Yeah.
and the kind of rapid-fire change that the
Yeah.
world throws at them now.
It's like that Gary Hamel quote from the white paper.
Yeah.
The world is becoming more turbulent than organizations are becoming adaptable.
Yeah, that's a powerful one.
That one really hit me.
It does, because you know that classic top-down pyramid model?
Right. The one that was designed for stability and efficiency.
Right.
Well, it's not always so great at keeping pace with today's world,
Yeah.
with the complexity and the speed of change.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
we're seeing this play out in a lot of different industries where the need for stability
Right.
clashes with this need for speed and agility.
And so Holacracy comes in
Right.
and says, hey, we have a totally new operating system
Yeah.
for your company.
Exactly. Instead of just tweaking around the edges,
Yeah.
Holacracy is like a complete system overhaul,
Right.
like upgrading from MS-DOS to Windows.
Yeah.
It's that different.
Okay.
So instead of that pyramid,
Okay.
we get this system of nested circles,
Right.
which is a holarchy.
Uh-huh.
And each circle is a self-managing team.
Okay.
Holon, actually.
A holon.
Yeah, a self-contained unit that's also part of the larger whole.
Okay.
So think of it like the human body.
Yeah.
You've got organs,
Uh-huh.
which are made of tissues,
Right.
which are made of cells. Each level has its own function,
Yeah.
but they all work together.
Okay, I'm starting to see the picture.
Yeah.
So these circles
Right.
have a lot of autonomy,
Yeah.
but they still need to coordinate with each other.
Right.
How does that work without someone calling the shots?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Holacracy actually gets rid of the traditional manager role
Okay.
and replaces it with these clearly defined roles
Okay.
within each circle.
Right.
And these roles aren't like static job titles.
Right.
They evolve based on the work that needs to be done.
So more dynamic.
Yeah, much more dynamic.
Okay. Less about your title and more about what you're actually contributing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And decision-making happens through a specific governance process.
Okay.
And this is where the circle defines its roles,
Uh-huh.
its responsibilities,
Okay.
and even its own decision-making authority.
Okay, so it's like building the
Yeah.
structure within which the work happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I can see where people might get nervous with this.
Mhm.
Right. No boss to tell you what to do.
Right. It sounds like a recipe for chaos.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And even the research paper
Mm-hmm.
that you sent
Yeah.
by Krasuja and Radojevic and Janjuzic,
Yeah.
they bring up this potential for instability.
Right.
But Holacracy tries to counter that
Okay.
with its tension-driven governance.
Okay, so fill me in on that.
Yeah,
This is where the tension part of the name comes in.
it is.
Okay.
So attention in Holacracy terms is basically any gap between what is
Uh-huh.
and what could be.
Okay.
Could be a problem,
Yeah.
an inefficiency, or even an opportunity that's not being seized.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all.
It's just like a signal
Yeah,
that something needs attention.
exactly. It's just a signal that there's room for improvement.
Okay.
And there's a very specific meeting process
Okay.
for addressing these tensions.
Okay.
And it's not about consensus
Right.
or a single leader deciding.
Uh-huh.
It's a structured way to gather input, process it,
Right.
and come up with a solution that works for the circle as a whole.
So distributed authority,
Right.
constantly evolving roles,
Yeah.
decisions made through this tension process.
Well-
It really is like a whole new operating system for how work gets done.
It is. And to really make this shift,
Yeah.
Holacracy even has a written constitution
Okay.
that a company actually formally adopts.
Okay.
The CEO actually cedes their power
Wow.
to this constitution.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
It shows a real commitment to this new way of doing things,
Yeah.
but does it actually work?
Well, let's look at some real-world examples
Bet.
to see how this plays out in practice.
Okay.
So you sent over some information about
Yeah.
two very different companies that have adopted Holacracy.
Right.
Zappos And the David Allen Company.
Zappos is the big splashy one that really went all in
Yeah.
on this no boss experiment.
They did?
And their CEO, Tony Hsieh,
Yeah.
was really fascinated by how cities grow and stay innovative even as they get bigger.
Right.
He even had this quote in the white paper
Yeah.
talking about how companies tend to do the opposite.
Uh-huh.
Like they get bigger and less innovative over time.
Yeah, they lose that spark.
Yeah.
And he saw Holacracy as a way to structure Zappos.
Right.
More like a city?
Right, like self-organized.
Self-organizing.
It's adaptable.
Oh, adaptable.
With people taking ownership, like mini entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
And they took it pretty far.
Yeah.
I mean, they even implemented this thing called surge pricing for wages.
Yeah, like Uber does with fares.
Yeah, employees could earn more for working the busiest shifts.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, it was all about responding to demand in this dynamic way.
Yeah, exactly.
But whether that specific experiment was successful long-term is debatable.
Yeah.
But it shows how they were willing to really push the boundaries.
Yeah, they were willing to experiment.
Yeah, of what self-management could look like.
Exactly.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing.
No.
Something like 14% of their employees took a buyout.
Right.
Rather than make the switch to Holacracy.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant chunk of people.
Yeah, that shows this isn't for everyone.
Right. It requires a certain comfort level with ambiguity.
Yeah.
A high degree of self-motivation.
Right.
Not everyone thrives in that kind of environment.
Which brings us to the David Allen Company.
Yes.
You know, the getting things done folks.
Right.
They also adopted Holacracy.
They did.
But their reasons were a little bit different.
Yeah, for them it was about aligning the structure of their company with the principles of their productivity methodology.
Right.
I mean, they were already very process-oriented.
Right.
So Holacracy's structured approach was a natural fit.
Yeah.
And talk about a fast rollout.
Yeah.
They restructured their entire company in just 2 weeks.
Wow.
Using Holacracy.
That's incredible.
Which speaks to the clarity of the system, but also to their existing company culture.
Right.
They were primed for this kind of change.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how Holacracy can be tailored
to
different organizational needs.
Okay, so we've seen how Holacracy plays out in very different contexts, but let's be honest. There's got to be a downside to all of this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, what are the potential pitfalls?
Well, there are definitely challenges.
Yeah.
And that lack of traditional hierarchy can be a big one.
Right.
The Krasulja paper
Yeah.
brought this up, the potential for confusion
Right.
and instability
Yeah.
without someone clearly in charge.
So could Holacracy actually lead to more chaos?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Not less.
It's possible if it's not implemented well.
Right.
And some critics argue that Holacracy can become too focused on process, potentially stifling creativity and innovation.
Right.
You know, it's a framework, not a rigid set of rules.
Right.
It needs to be adapted to each company's specific culture. So a framework that could either support people or box them in.
Exactly.
And it all seems to come back to company culture.
Yeah.
And whether people are genuinely empowered or just shuffled around into different boxes.
That's a great point.
Right. And that raises an interesting question about leadership.
Yes.
If there are no bosses,
Right.
how does leadership actually function in a holacratic system?
That is a great question.
Right.
And something we should definitely explore further.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah, we have.
In this first part of our deep dive.
We've unpacked the basic principles.
Yep.
Looked at how Holacracy plays out in practice, and even started to poke at some of the potential downsides.
Oh, yeah.
Now, let's shift our focus to the practical implications of these ideas.
Okay.
How do teams actually operate day-to-day in a Holacracy?
Yeah.
What are the nuts and bolts that make this system work or not work?
Let's dive into those details.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. So you're probably wondering how this no boss thing actually works, like day to day.
Right. Like, does everyone just kind of do their own thing?
Yeah. How do you actually like make decisions and get things done in Holacracy?
Yeah.
Well, it's not just a free-for-all.
Okay.
One of the key mechanisms here is this clear distinction between governance and operations.
Okay.
Governance is about defining the rules and responsibilities, setting the structure.
Okay.
While operations is like the actual work of getting things done.
Okay, so it's like governance is creating the playing field and operations is playing the game.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they each have their own types of meetings.
Right.
So governance meetings are where those circles we talked about earlier
Yeah.
define and clarify
Yeah.
their roles and their accountabilities.
Okay.
That's where the tension-driven governance process
Right.
comes into play.
So in a governance meeting, if someone sees a gap between what's happening
Yeah.
and what should be happening,
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
they can bring that up as a tension.
Exactly. They bring it up as a tension,
Okay.
and then that tension gets processed through a very specific format
Okay.
that's outlined in the Holacracy Constitution.
Right.
It's really designed to keep the meeting focused
Uh-huh.
and ensure that it actually leads to some concrete outcomes.
That's a refreshing change from like all those endless meetings I've sat through
Yeah, right.
where nothing actually gets decided.
Exactly.
All right.
So much time wasted.
Yeah.
And then separate from those governance meetings,
Yeah, okay.
there are tactical meetings
Okay.
that are focused on operations.
Right.
So that's the day-to-day work.
Mhm.
So these are about coordinating action,
Uh-huh.
tracking progress,
Right.
and addressing any roadblocks that come up.
Okay, so there's like a system for working through structural issues
Right.
and a separate system
Yeah.
for handling the actual tasks at hand.
Exactly.
Except.
Right.
But doesn't all this process and structure potentially stifle creativity?
Okay, that's a valid point.
Yeah. I know it's something that came up in some of the research.
Yeah, too much rigidity can definitely be a problem.
Right.
But remember, in Holacracy, tensions are seen as opportunities
Okay.
for improvement and innovation.
Okay, so you're encouraged to identify those gaps
Yes.
and actually find ways to do things better.
Right.
It's not just about
Yeah.
blindly following a process.
It's about constantly evolving
Right.
and adapting.
Okay.
Holacracy is really about creating a framework
Uh-huh.
that balances structure
Mm-hmm.
with flexibility,
Okay.
where individual initiative can thrive.
But that balance seems so tricky to get right.
Yeah, it is a delicate balance.
Yeah. It makes me think about
Yeah,
something Brian Robertson,
Mhm.
the co-founder of Holacracy One,
right.
said in the white paper.
Yeah.
He said that Holacracy is not a governance process of the people,
Right.
by the people, for the people. It's governance of the organization
Yep.
through the people
Right.
for the purpose.
Yes, that's a key distinction.
Yeah, it's about serving the purpose of the organization,
Right.
not individual agendas.
And in Holacracy, that purpose isn't dictated from the top down.
Right.
It's something that's discovered
Uh-huh.
and articulated collectively,
So everyone has a voice in shaping the direction.
in theory,
Yes.
of the company.
Each circle defines its own purpose
Okay,
in alignment with the overall purpose of the organization.
which makes sense because if people feel connected to that larger purpose,
Absolutely.
they're going to be more motivated and engaged.
Exactly. It can be really powerful.
Right.
But let's be real,
Yeah.
even with a shared purpose,
Right.
making this kind of radical shift
Yeah.
in how you work
Mm-hmm.
can be a real challenge.
Especially for companies that are used to
Yeah.
a more traditional hierarchy.
Right.
The Krysulcha Radovich and John Jusik paper
Yeah.
really highlighted
The potential for a bumpy transition.
it can be tough.
Yeah.
It requires a real shift in mindset,
Right.
both for individuals
Right.
and for the organization as a whole.
Right.
People need to be comfortable with ambiguity,
Yeah.
with taking ownership,
Right.
with resolving conflicts constructively.
So it's not just about learning
It's not just about the rules.
a new set of rules.
Yeah, it's about developing a whole new set of
right.
skills and habits.
Yeah. Things like self-awareness.
Yes.
Clear communication.
Yeah.
Collaborative problem solving.
All of that becomes even more crucial in a holacracy.
Right, because there's no boss there
Right.
to set the tone or
Yeah.
provide direction in the traditional sense.
Exactly. And this is where leadership becomes really interesting.
Right, because even though Holacracy distributes authority,
Uh-huh.
strong leadership is still essential.
Absolutely it is, but it looks different.
Right, so it's less about directing and controlling
Yeah.
and more about facilitating and empowering.
Yes, exactly. It's about creating the conditions for people to thrive,
Right.
to take ownership, and to contribute their best work.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like a gardener
Okay.
who cultivates the environment for plants to flourish.
Right.
They don't dictate how the plant should grow.
Right.
They create the conditions that allow for natural growth and development.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
So we've talked about how Holacracy works on this practical level.
Uh-huh.
But why are companies even trying this in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, what are they hoping to achieve?
Well, a lot of it comes down to agility and adaptability.
Okay.
You know, in today's fast-paced,
Right.
constantly changing world, companies need to be able to respond quickly
Yeah.
to new challenges and opportunities.
Right.
And the traditional hierarchy with its layers of bureaucracy
Yeah.
and slow decision-making processes,
Huh.
often struggles to keep up.
That's like trying to steer a giant ship.
Right.
It takes forever to change direction.
Yeah.
Exactly. Holacracy, with its distributed decision-making and
Right.
self-managing teams,
Uh-huh.
is designed to be much more responsive,
Okay.
like a fleet of smaller,
Right.
more agile boats.
So companies are looking for a way to become more nimble,
Right.
more adaptable to change.
Exactly. And there's also this growing recognition
Yeah.
that the traditional hierarchy often fails to tap into
Uh-huh.
the full potential of employees.
Right.
You know, when people feel disempowered or disengaged,
Okay.
it stifles creativity and innovation.
So Holacracy is also about unleashing
Yeah.
the collective intelligence and energy
Yeah.
of the entire organization.
It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to contribute
Right.
and creating a system
Yeah.
that allows those contributions to flourish.
Okay.
It's about fostering a sense of ownership,
Right.
purpose, and engagement.
Yeah.
And that in turn
Yeah.
can lead to greater productivity,
Right.
innovation, and ultimately success. So it's not just about efficiency and profits.
No, it's not.
It's about creating a more
Right.
humane and fulfilling way of working.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating to explore.
Yeah,
It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about
right.
the nature of work itself.
It's about moving beyond the traditional notions of hierarchy and control
Yeah.
to create organizations that are not only successful,
Uh-huh.
but also meaningful
Right.
and align with the needs of both individuals
Right.
and society as a whole.
Well said.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground in this part.
We have.
We've delved into the practical side of Holacracy,
Yeah.
explored the motivations behind its adoption,
Uh-huh.
and even touched on those larger implications
Right.
for the future of work.
Yeah, I think it's time to bring it all together now
Okay.
and distill the key takeaways for our listener. Like,
Right.
what does all of this actually mean for them? So we've really gone deep on Holacracy,
We have.
the principles, the challenges, and
Right.
potential benefits.
Yeah.
But what does it all really mean?
Right.
Is this just a management fad
Right.
or a genuine shift in how we think about work?
I think it's definitely more than just a fad.
Okay.
Holacracy really challenges
Yeah.
some very fundamental assumptions about how organizations should function.
Right.
It's not simply about flattening the hierarchy.
Right.
It's about redistributing power,
Okay.
embracing self-management,
Yeah.
and creating a system that's built for constant change.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to that analogy we talked about earlier of
Yeah.
a jazz band
Mhm.
where everyone's skilled and talented.
Right.
They know the overall structure of the song,
Yeah,
but there's that freedom to improvise within that framework.
exactly. And that's a big part of what Holacracy is trying to do.
Right.
To create a structure where individual initiative and creativity can thrive,
Mm-hmm.
but still ensure that everyone is aligned around that common purpose.
Right, because without that shared purpose,
Yeah.
it's just a bunch of people doing their own thing.
Right. It wouldn't be a very effective organization.
Very effective.
And that focus on purpose,
Right.
on doing work that truly matters,
Yeah.
can be a really powerful motivator for people.
Right. It's not just about checking tasks off a list.
Exactly.
It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Right. And it can be really fulfilling.
But let's be honest.
Okay.
Holacracy isn't a utopia.
Yeah.
We've talked about the potential downsides,
Yeah.
the challenges with transitioning from a traditional hierarchy,
Yeah.
the need for a very specific kind of company culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It requires a real shift in mindset
Yeah.
for both leaders and employees.
Right.
Letting go of control.
Yeah.
Embracing ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
Trusting in the process and in each other.
Right.
These aren't easy things to do.
No, they're not.
And even the research backs this up.
Right, like the Krasulja Radojevic and John Jusek paper
Yeah.
pointed out that the lack of a clear hierarchy can actually create instability
Yes.
if it's not managed well.
If it's not implemented thoughtfully,
Right.
it can lead to more problems than it solves.
So Holacracy is not a quick fix.
Definitely not.
It's a journey,
It is.
and one that not every organization is ready for.
Right. It requires a certain level of maturity
Uh-huh.
and self-awareness,
Right.
both for the individuals
Yeah.
and for the organization as a whole.
And even the ones that are ready for it,
Yeah.
it's still going to be a process.
It's going to be messy.
Right, there's going to be bumps along the way.
There will be bumps.
But even if you never work in a fully holacratic company,
Right.
there's still a lot to learn from these
I
principles.
think so.
That's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Even just understanding these concepts.
Yeah, like distributed authority.
Yeah. Tension-driven governance.
Purpose-driven action.
All of that
Yeah.
can change how you approach your work and your relationships within a team. It can empower you to identify problems and opportunities more clearly,
Yes.
to communicate more effectively,
Right.
and to take more ownership of your work, regardless of your job title.
Exactly.
So even if your company isn't ready to ditch the org chart
Right.
and go full holacracy,
Yeah.
you can still bring some of that spirit into your own work life.
Absolutely. You can start experimenting with these ideas in your own team.
And that leads to an even more interesting question.
Okay, what's that?
What if we applied some of these principles outside of work?
Oh, interesting.
What would happen if we brought more distributed authority and purpose-driven action into our communities, our families, even our own personal lives?
That's a great point.
Right? It's not just about changing how companies work. It's about changing how we think about organizing ourselves, making decisions, working together to achieve something meaningful.
It's about shifting from a mindset of control and hierarchy
Yeah.
to one of collaboration and empowerment.
And that shift can have ripple effects far beyond the workplace.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into holacracy, we leave you with this final thought.
All right.
How can you add a little bit of that holacratic spirit into your own life, regardless of where you work or what you do?
Something to ponder.
It is something to ponder.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for our deep dive into holacracy.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the basic principles
to
real-world examples to the potential benefits and challenges and even some broader implications for the future of work.
We did.
Hopefully this has given you a better understanding of what holacracy is, how it works, and whether it might be something that could work for you.
Or at least inspire you in some way. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.